It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you to Professor Adel for giving us the opportunity to spend what is hopefully going to be a valuable 15 minutes. So I just arrived from literally a couple of days ago from San Francisco, so I was just starting to nod off out there at the back, just falling asleep, so this particular session was aptly timed for myself. So thank you. So we're passionate as a software and technology company about really trying to solve the problem of diabetes, but we're not medical. As you can see, there aren't many initials after my name. So I feel pretty humbled about being here with an audience where I see lots of MDs, PhDs, and all sorts of different initials after your name. I don't have that. So I'm not clinical, but I am passionate about technology. So passionate so much that, has anybody got their smartphones open here? Who's going to admit to that? Anybody got a smartphone open? If you Google Tupelo during the presentation, see what you get. Yes, you're going to come up with the birthplace of Elvis. That's not why we named the company. You're going to come up with Tupelo in the United States, which is a place, which is one way of looking at it. Or you'll find that there's a specific blossom on a tree, which is called a Tupelo tree. And that blossom, when it's harvested by bees, produces a certain type of honey, which is a very specific glycemic index, which can be prescribed to diabetics. So that's just a little bit about where we come from as a company. So my colleague, Dr. Eric Hazard, who is the guy with lots of initials after his name, is generally the guy that gives this pitch. But so unfortunately, you've got a lowly individual today who's going to give this for you. So the synopsis of what I want to get through in the next few minutes. I want to give you some insight as to some programs and some work streams that we're looking at as a company. These programs and these work streams are very important because they're giving us a profile for how we can be or play a supporting role and a facilitator for medical staff, for pharma companies to help resolve some of the problems that we're seeing in diabetes. So based on existing research, we've got some intelligence I want to share with you today that we've been working on in the United States. We've got obviously a little bit of data we can share in terms of efficacy. And I also want to share as well about some of the key building blocks that from a company we're deploying to help solve a problem at scale. So, how are we getting all of this done? Well, as a company, we're fairly spread. So we've got some execution in the United Arab Emirates, which is where I'm based. We've also got some execution in Doha. We've got studies in obesity. We do our tech R&D. We've got schools programs running through Europe and through Germany. We're doing a lot of work with the insurance communities and the nutritional communities in India. And in the United States, we're working hand in hand with a lot of senior universities who have a lot of funds available to invest in programs and initiatives, actually that you've been talking about today. So a lot of the lifestyle initiatives that some of my colleagues have been talking about, these are very specific things that hold dear to some of the universities in the United States. The challenge is they can't get the programs off the ground because of legislation. So that's potentially where we would come in. Now the interesting thing is, as a company, this really frustrates me. So as a chief exec, I look at this, I see my staff all over the world doing all sorts of crazy stuff, studying obesity in Germany, doing school programs and clinical validation in the United States. It's a 24-hour working day, and it's a 7-day working week as well, and it's a real pain until we bring everything together. So once we start to bring together the work that we're doing in Germany, the work that we're doing in the United States, the work that we're doing in the Middle East, then you start to get a profile of how people are behaving. You start to get a profile of data. You start to get a profile of the whole analytical concept of how people are using the technology to manage very specific disease case scenarios. So, what is it that we do as a company in terms of disease case scenarios? What are we here to try and talk to you about today? So as a company, we provide a technology ecosystem. That ecosystem consists of devices, it consists of software, it consists of analytical capability, it's got mobility aspects to it, but it's also got some fixed aspects to it. So it's a platform that we can provide to patients, which focuses on health and healthcare management, and it focuses on the real complex end of the spectrum. So we're not here to talk to you about how to stay fit. We want to talk to you about how to stay healthy, and primarily how to stay healthy through preventative strategies. So that's what we do as a company. So we've got all of this technology out there. We've deployed it in several countries around the world now, and this is what we actually give in terms of an emphasis. So what you will see today with a lot of the technology that's out there, there's a very traditional emphasis, which is there are devices, they get data, and that data is consumed. The challenge that we have is that approach is fairly ineffective. So what we're deploying as a company in terms of tools, processes, and technology is a way that when we capture data, that data can be shared with the right resources. It can be interpreted. Once it's interpreted, it does become information. And once you've got information, you can start to share that experience. The experience can then be elaborated on, and then you're in a situation where it's not about data anymore. It's not about data which sits on a device which is a blood measurement. It's not about your waist circumference. It's not about your pulse rate. What it is, it's insightful, it's contextual, it's actionable. That's the big thing. So that's what we do with all of our tools, our software, our processes. We look to support the clinical community with insightful, contextual, actionable, and most important, relevant data. So let's look at some clinical feedback concerning care and management when we talk about diabetes. So here's a couple of problem scenarios that we see. So in terms of technology, which is my space, so we have a lot to answer for. Thousands and thousands of apps are out there. I'm sure you've seen them. Lots of very nice interfaces. The interesting thing, I think last count, there were over 1,900 pure diabetes management apps out there, but less than 1% were being used consistently. So there's something going wrong. Self-management. Not everybody wants to be moved towards the self-management end of the spectrum. There are people who need to be walked through the process. If you're a senior, if you're aging, the last thing you want to be told is, there's a smartphone, there's a tablet, there's some gadgets, go get busy and we'll monitor you remotely. It's not going to happen. So you need to bring people and you need to meet people where they are in terms of the care that they're receiving. Also, this is a very costly scenario. The feedback I get from clinics day in and day out is that they say, Martin, it's all very well you spouting about the various virtues of technology and how it can be preventative and how it can stop people having a major meltdown, but the scenario is it's costly and I have to pay for that cost up front, and as a clinic, I'm sorry, I can't afford it. We also look at the standards of programs as well, and I think standards and programs, they're just not meeting the need. So if I look particularly at programs in Europe, I was on a call actually just at the weekend, and in terms of just the standard programs, that we're working with a clinic in Amsterdam who they tell us that they're doing a very good job in terms of managing patients, particularly diabetic patients, and they class that as 4 visits per patient per year. So the challenge is, what happens when something goes wrong between those 4 visits? So there's a lot to overcome in terms of where we're going. So one way to do that is via a study. One of the things Adel asked me to talk about is how can we scale? How can we use this information wisely? So once we're starting to gather data, which as a technology company we're very good at doing, how can we put this into the hands of people who can take really powerful decisions with it, but most importantly, how can they improve the outcome, not of single individuals, but of masses of population? And that's what I want to talk to you about over the next 6 minutes. So let's have a look at what strategies are out there in terms of our ability to capture real-time data. So we're talking about a study. This is a study we're about to embark on in the United States. We're targeting around about 1,000 patients, and we're bringing in the concept of a nurse practitioner or a nurse health coach. Probably a 6-month program length, and in terms of some of the, what I would call the patient clinical areas we're looking at, it's going to be this area. So we've got basically devices in the field with individuals with varying states of intelligence, so some devices are more intelligent than others, with the capability to capture all of this data. And all of this data will be fed into a central source, and that central source, we will be putting individuals around that information who can then provide insightful, actionable responses around it. So that's a little bit about the program. So we're going to be looking at outcomes which affect all of these areas. So not only just the clinical, but also everything right down to are doctors effectively using their time to service patients, which I think I would guess today the answer is no, they're not. And that's not a reflection on the doctors, that's just a that's a reflection on the administrative workload that we need to take away. So the pursued outcomes of the program that we're working towards. These are the areas here, so I've taken those and I've tabulated them, and we're making some predictions through this program that we're going to execute with the universities in the United States. So yes, there are standard programs operating out there today, standard. We'll talk a little bit about what we mean by a standard program versus an enhanced model which we're proposing as a tech company with nurse practitioners and clinical assistants. We're talking about patient goal achievement, self-efficacy, we're talking about cost effectiveness, okay? And these are the outcomes, broadly speaking, we hope to generate outcomes which are significantly better and are significantly more improved than the traditional ways that we service the population that's currently struggling with diabetes. So, as I said, the standard program, there are other programs out there, but we've got a very specific set of standards that we're using to say, this is the standard program. These are the things that get baked into it when we mention the standard program. So it's a fully randomized trial. So if you're a nurse practitioner who we're bringing into the program, you can be in any one of these groups. If you're a patient, you can be in any one of these groups. So you don't know. So this removes any bias towards a good practitioner versus a bad practitioner, being aligned to a certain group, a good patient, a bad patient, a patient that's compliant and adherent, and a patient that isn't being aligned to certain groups. So we've jumbled all of that up, and this is the fully randomized trial that we're actually going to go for. So what's the difference between a standard program and a nurse practitioner program who's using some technology? So periodical check-in, there is some goal incentive, some goal setting, but largely they're not incentivized. There is some form of an advice line, but largely it's reactive rather than proactive. Low structure of information, so if you're a doctor and you're speaking to a client or to a patient, you typically tend to find the information that's provided to you is not very well structured. You've got to go dig for it. You spend a lot of the time actually looking through information rather than talking to the participant. And very limited technology is part of that process as well. The Life platform with nurse practitioners is completely different. So what we're doing is we enable a highly automated technology platform. It has incentives for people to stay engaged in the program. It has the ability to capture real-time information and present that real-time information in the context to which the physician and the lead, the case management lead or the nurse practitioner lead has a need for, and that's the big thing. So if you can get the information presented to you in a way that's meaningful, the likelihood of you turning that around and giving a swift quality intervention, an intervention outcome to an individual is going to be quite high. So we go through the process as well in terms of, with this program, we're setting up an entire coaching structure for nurses. So the reason for doing this is very simple. The cost of a physician versus the cost of a nurse. The availability of a nurse versus the availability of a physician. So we're working with different sets of availability. So we feel what we need to be doing is engaging the physician at the critical point of care in the right context. And we believe the 70 to 80 to 90% of the other aspects of the care continuum can be handled by effectively trained and highly geared, highly intelligent nurses. We also find as well, in terms of nurses, this area here plays a huge role in terms of a continuity figure, in terms of your treatment. So this is really important that we establish this baseline. So the study proposal, this is the tech that we put in. So we have all sorts of gadgets that we can give to the community, from weigh scales through blood glucose devices, which can take your blood and remotely transmit that to the cloud. We have smartphone dependent and smartphone dependent devices. All of the information bidirectional, so medical staff can communicate to patients via the cloud. Patients can communicate to medical staff via the cloud. So what you end up with, right in the center of this whole ecosystem of patients and caregivers, is accurate, up-to-date, real-time information, which allows them to give you the right care that you need before the bad situation sets in. Thank you. How about that? That was like